Welcome, everyone. This is I Need Living Conversations. I'm Julian Catari. I'm having a conversation with Sacred Blue Heron Woman, with whom we get together every week to speak about many different things. We've done this for 176 sessions already. This is the 176th session, and this is Into the Abyss of the System, the 11th version, where we go into the many different wars and aspects of how we've been brought into a world that is just taken over by the system, by a darkness, by the absence of the sacred. And in these investigations, we find a lot of details that many don't know about and that are just gruesome and are helpful to know in order to understand the magnitude of where we're at. So we're going to continue this journey. And what's in store for this conversation?
We are talking about the tsunamis in Sri Lanka and then Israel.
Okay, tsunamis like war tsunamis?
No,
Oh,
wave
like
tsunamis.
natural tsunamis. Okay.
Natural tsunamis, yeah. So what came clear this week, I've told the story before somewhere in our talks that our ancestors were all animistic. They saw, and that's what the aloha part of our model is the presence of God, or the presence of, I'd like to rephrase that and say the presence of love in everything.
Mm-hmm.
And Humberto Maturana and Francisco Varela, the Chilean guys whose work is pretty known, they, at the end of their book, they're like, it's all about love. But nobody's put the two together. I really believe that just in the absence of the sacred is the absence of love.
That's it. Totally.
It's the orgone energy that Wilhelm Reich found, that the orgasmic energy, it's the prana, it's the ki, the chi, the mana of Hawaii, it's love.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm using the Quechua word munai, because I think munai is so much deeper than love. So munai ki, the guy with Setai called it vital intelligence, same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's all the same thing. It's all love. So our animistic ancestors saw love everywhere.
Right.
And then somebody decided they wanted to kind of dominate. So they came along and started programming people to believe that love was only in these godheads. And they created like the gods of Mount Olympus, and they created these gods in their image that were that fucked around and were mean and drunk, and
I like how you referenced that. It's and I never really even went into thinking about it that way. It's really interesting.
Yeah, these images of love. They created these images of absolute love in their own image, but still there was this presence. The loving presence was everywhere. People still acknowledged it, right? The breath of life, so to speak, the aloha, the breath of God is in our presence. The breath of life is right here. The vital intelligence infuses everyone, this sacred. Well, then monotheism came along, really the domination, and they really programmed love out of us. Taught us that we're sinful, we're dirty, we're vile, we're god-awful beings, and our God, our source of love, is way the fuck off planet. And so therefore they had to create a representation of him, which is money. And in the absence of that, they've had to create that of course, in the absence of the loving force of life that they programmed out of us, but they're not acknowledging that it still exists, that it's still there, it's still pushing us, it's still right. That's why she showed herself to Juan Diego on Tepeyac Hill, and right, as the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. So that's I'm calling it from now on instead of organ, energy, or chi or prana, it's going to be Munaiki.
Okay.
That's sacred.
Mm-hmm.
That's the sacred glue that holds everything together, that animates all of us, that makes us breathe, that makes our hearts beat. And so in the absence of love, in the absence of Munaiki, we have this bullshit nonsense we've been talking about for weeks on end, that we see playing out so dramatically in the White House right now. I mean, just so freaking dramatically.
Right.
So, so the plan to drive the fishing people from the beaches. The tsunami of Sri Lanka left 2.5 million people homeless and took the lives of 250,000. Most of the people in Arugam Bay had been fighting off corporatism for years, and now with the tsunami, the plan would work. The federal government had commissioned a team of international consultants to develop a reconstruction blueprint for Arugam Bay, and the plan was to turn it into a South Asian Riviera. The $80 million redevelopment project was to be financed with aid money raised in the name of the victims of the tsunami. This was 2014. It was the weeping faces of the fishing families that triggered a historic outpouring of international generosity. Yet the reconstruction meant nothing less than the deliberate destruction of their culture and the way of life and the theft of their land. The entire process, like in Iraq, would result in victimizing victims, exploiting the exploited, foreigners profiting from the misery of the population. High-end tourism is a bankable growth market. The phenomenal growth of this sector is a byproduct of the extreme inequality that resulted from the generalized triumph of the Chicago School economics. Regardless of the overall state of the economy, there is now a large enough elite made up of new multimillionaires and billionaires for Wall Street to see them as super consumers, able to carry the consumer demand all on their own. In October 1998, for an entire week, Hurricane Mitch had parked himself over Central America, lashing the coast and mountains of Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and swallowing villages whole, killing more than 9,000 people. The already impoverished countries could not dig themselves out without generous foreign aid, and it came at a big price. In the 2 months after Mitch struck, with the country still knee-deep in rubble, corpses, and mud, the Honduran Congress passed laws allowing the privatization of airports, seaports, and highways, and fast-track plans to privatize the state telephone company, the National Electric Company, and parts of the water sector. What does this mean? Well, for instance, my local water company here is private. That means they have no regulations. So like a few years ago, when I first moved in, I found out very quickly that their habit was they would pick on somebody once a summer and or 2 or 3 people and slap them with outrageous water bills. And if you couldn't pay it, they would just shut your water off. There's no one to complain to because they're privatized. When I had a friend that came and bailed me out the first time because I just didn't have money. And then another time they slapped me with a water bill for 40,000 gallons. And I had a veteran friend come from Tulsa and they gave me a leak adjustment and since then they haven't touched me because they've realized that I can't be victimized. Right. Okay. But that's what privatization is. There's no, I even complained to my state senator and he couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
Right. That's what privatization does. They can charge whatever the fuck they want. They can slap you with whatever bills they want. And if you don't pay it, they're just going to cut off their services.
But the good thing you didn't let yourself be victim.
No, but that's what I'm saying. This is what we need to understand. This is what privatization does. It's not good. So Honduras even rammed through a radically pro-business mining law that lowered the environmental standards and made it easier to evict people from homes that stood in the way of new mines. It was the same in Guatemala and Nicaragua. Destruction carries with it an opportunity for foreign investment, is what Guatemala's foreign minister said at the World Economic Forum in Davos in 1999. By the time the tsunami in Sri Lanka hit, Washington was ready to make the Hurricane Mitch model take it to the next level, aiming not just at individual new laws, but at direct corporate control over the reconstruction. Again, they wanted to build a model nation. The only direct money the U.S. government spent on small-scale fishing people was the $1 million grant to upgrade the temporary shelters where they were being warehoused until the beaches where they had lived were redeveloped. The World Bank and USAID understood that soon the tsunami survivors would melt into the billions of poor faces worldwide, so many of whom already live in tin shacks without water. And the proliferation of these shacks has become as much an accepted feature of the global economy as the explosion of $800 a night hotels and higher. And why are we okay with this? Sri Lanka wasn't the only country that got hit by a second tsunami of land and law grabs. Thailand and the Maldives and Indonesia have also experienced it. In India, tsunami survivors were left so impoverished that 150 women were driven to sell their kidneys in order to buy food. Residents were barred from rebuilding, but hotels were showered with incentives. Temporary camps for the survivors were miserable, militarized holding pens, and almost no permanent reconstruction got done, as entire ways of life were being erased. In the Maldives, hundreds of thousands of poor brown-skinned people, the fishing people, deemed unproductive by the World Bank, were moved against their wishes to make room for the ultra-rich, mostly light-skinned people, the high-yield tourists. Some of the most direct clashes took place in Thailand, where within 24 hours of the wave, developers sent in armed private security guards to fence in land that they had been coveting for resorts. The idea of open land has been significant since the colonization of Americas. If the land was declared empty or wasted, it could be seized and its people eliminated without remorse. The NGOs bore the brunt of the anger at the reconstruction because they were the most visible. Their logos were everywhere, while the World Bank and USAID and government officials dreaming up plans rarely left their urban offices. The NGO aid organizations were the only ones offering help, but what they offered was horrifically inadequate. Part of the problem was, and still is, that the aid complex has become so large and so cut off from the people that it serves the lifestyle of the NGO staffers. And that's become a national obsession, being a staff. And I have a friend who used to work for a big NGO aid company in Tulsa for veterans, and he told me they couldn't even just hand out a blanket to a homeless. Mm-hmm. And that's why Mother Teresa, any one of her followers that tried to create an NGO or nonprofit organization for her, she would immediately disband them because she wanted the freedom to give the aid that came in directly to the people, not to the staffers of her organizations. Mm-hmm. So their wildlife, high-end hotels, beachfront villas, and brand new white sport utility vehicle was the way of life for NGO staffers in aid areas, right? So that's what the money goes to. It doesn't go directly to the people. It goes to the staffers of these organizations so they can live in an $800 a night beachfront hotel. And the people, the victims, get nothing. All the aid organizations had these big white new sport utility vehicles, monstrous things that were far too big for the country's roads. And all day long they would roar past these camps, forcing everyone to eat their dust while seeing the logos of World Vision, Save the Children, etc., and not receiving any help at all. Sri Lanka received, like Iraq, a peace penalty, the imposition of a cutthroat combative economic model that made life harder for a majority of the people at the very moment when they needed help. Everywhere the Chicago School economics has triumphed, it has created a permanent underclass of between 25 and 60% of the population. It has always been a form of war. When Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, the economically secure drove out of town, checked into hotels, and called their insurance company. But the 120,000 people in New Orleans without cars who depended on the state to organize their evacuation waited for help that did not arrive, making desperate SOS signs or rafts out of their refrigerator doors. A political scientist wrote that the storm exposed the consequences of neoliberalism's lies and mystifications in a single locale all at once about Hurricane Katrina. The facts of the exposure are well known, from the levees that were never repaired to the underfunded public transit system that failed, to the fact that the city's idea of disaster preparedness was passing out DVDs telling people that if a hurricane came, they should get out of town. In the summer of 2004, and more than a year before Katrina hit, the state of Louisiana put in a request to FEMA for funds to develop an in-depth contingency plan for a powerful hurricane. The request was refused. FEMA then awarded a $500,000 contract to a private firm to come up with a catastrophic hurricane disaster plan for Southeast Louisiana and the city of New Orleans. The company spared no expense. It brought together more than 100 experts, and when the money ran out, it went back to FEMA for more. Eventually, the bill for the exercise came to more than $1 million, and nothing was ever done for the city of New Orleans or Southeast Louisiana. The company came up with scenarios for mass evacuations, all the sensible things that didn't happen when a hurricane like the one they were imagining hit. That's because 8 months after the contractors submitted their report, no action had been taken because there was no money for the follow-up. This story is typical of the lopsided state that Bush built. A weak, underfunded, ineffective public sector on the one hand, and the parallel, richly funded corporatist infrastructure on the other. So within weeks of Katrina, the Gulf Coast had become a domestic laboratory for the same kind of government run by contractors that had been pioneered in Iraq. In New Orleans, as in Iraq, no opportunity for profit was left untapped. As in Iraq, government once again played the role of cash machine equipped for both withdrawals and deposits. Corporations withdrew funds through massive contracts, then repaid the government with campaign contributions and loyal foot soldiers for the next elections, and not reliable reconstruction work. The result? After all the layers of subcontractors had taken their cut, there was nothing left for the people doing the work. The top 20 service contractors have spent over $300,000 on lobbying and have donated near that to political campaigns, and that was 10 years ago. They've spent more than that now. Not so long ago, disasters were periods of social leveling, rare moments when communities put divisions aside and pulled together, and that happened in Sri Lanka until the aid started pouring in, and then nobody helped out each other anymore. Increasingly, disasters have become the opposite. They provide windows into a cruel and ruthlessly divided future in which money and race buy survival. Baghdad's green zone is the starkest expression of this world order. It has its own electrical grid, its own phone and sewage system, its own oil supply, and its own state-of-the-art hospital, all protected by 5-meter-thick walls. Everywhere in Iraq, the widely divergent value assigned to different categories of people is crudely evident. And the green zone emerges everywhere that the disaster capitalism complex descends, with the same stark partitions between the included and the excluded, the protected and the damned. The American Society of Civil Engineers said in 2007 that the U.S. had fallen so far behind in maintaining its public infrastructure roads, bridges, schools, and dams, that it would take more than $1 trillion over 5 years to bring it up to standard. Instead, these types of expenditures have been cut back. Our infrastructure is not getting restructured. By 2006, the disaster response industry had exploded, with a slew of new corporations entering the market, promising safety and security should the next big one hit. One of the more ambitious ventures was launched by an airline in West Palm Beach, Florida. HelpJet billed itself as the first hurricane escape plan that turned a hurricane evacuation into a jet setter vacation. When a storm is coming, the airline books holidays for its members at 5-star golf resorts, spas, or Disneyland. And with the reservations all made, the evacuees are then whisked out of the hurricane zone on a luxury jet. And guess who gets that? Only the rich. For the people left behind, there's a different kind of privatized solution, which is nothing. In 2006, the Red Cross signed a disaster response partnership with Walmart. Much of the parallel disaster economy has been built with taxpayers' money thanks to the boom in privatized war zone reconstruction. And most dramatic has been Blackwater's investment in its paramilitary infrastructure. Founded in 1996, the company has used the steady stream of contracts during the Bush years to build up a private army of 20,000 mercenary soldiers on call and a massive military complex in North Carolina. Wherever the disaster capitalism complex has landed, it has produced a proliferation of armed groupings outside the state. The emergence of this parallel privatized infrastructure reaches far beyond policing. When the contractor infrastructure built up during the Bush years is looked at as a whole, what is seen as a fully articulated state within a state that is as muscular and capable as the actual state is feeble and frail. So this corporate shadow state has been built almost exclusively with public resources, and yet the citizens who have funded it, who are climbing the corporate ladder, have absolutely no claim to this parallel economy or its resources. And that is why I bowed out of the Maharishi Institute MBA program, because it was just like, you cannot bring meditation, transcendental meditation, to this model and think it's okay. You can't. There's nothing right about climbing the corporate ladder. So during the Israeli attack on Lebanon in 2006, the U.S. government actually tried to charge its citizens for the cost of their own evacuations. If we continue in this direction, the images of people stranded on New Orleans rooftops will not only be a glimpse of America's unresolved past of racial inequality, but will also foreshadow a disaster apartheid in which survival is determined by who can afford to pay for escape. This is why so many people are so sanguine about this system, as they are confident they will be able to buy their way out of the worst of it. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. This may also partially explain why so many Trump supporters are Christian end-timers. Their escape hatch is their rapture, a parable for what they are creating down here, a system that invites destruction and disaster and then swoops in with private helicopters and airlifts them out and their friends to safety. At the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland in 2007, the participants knew that the world was going to hell and there was no stability in sight, but the global economy was roaring its approval. Soon after, it was described as a near complete disconnect between politics and markets, as something out of Dickens. This puzzling trend is called the Guns to Caviar Index. The index tracks the sales of fighter jets, the guns, and the executive jets, caviar. For 17 years, it consistently found that when the fighter jets were selling briskly, sales of luxury executive jets went down and vice versa. But that is no longer true. Since 2003, the year of the invasion of Iraq, the index found that spending has been going up on both, rapidly and simultaneously, which means our world is becoming less peaceful while accumulating significantly more profit. For only a few. Terrorist attacks, which used to send the stock market spiraling downward, now receive a similarly upbeat market reception. So on September 11, 2001, the Dow Jones plummeted 685 points as soon as the markets reopened. In sharp contrast, on July 7, 2005, the day 4 bombs ripped through London's public transport system, killing dozens and injuring hundreds, the U.S. stock market closed higher than it did the day before. The following August, on the day British law enforcement agencies arrested 24 suspects allegedly planning to blow up jetliners headed to the U.S., the NASDAQ closed higher also. Then there are the outrageous fortunes of the oil sector, a $40 billion profit in 2006 by ExxonMobil alone, the largest profit ever recorded. The oil industry has consistently managed to turn disasters to its long-term advantage, whether by ensuring that a large portion of the reconstruction fund in Afghanistan went to expensive road infrastructure for a new pipeline, while the most other major reconstruction projects stalled, or by pushing through Iraq's oil law while the country burned, or by piggybacking on Hurricane Katrina to plan the first new refineries in the U.S. since the 1970s. The oil and gas industry is so intimately entwined with the economy of disaster, both as root cause behind many disasters and as a beneficiary from them, that it deserves to be treated as an honorary adjunct of the disaster capitalism complex. The truth is that an economic system that requires constant growth while bucking almost all serious attempts at environmental regulation generates a steady stream of disasters all on its own. The appetite for easy short-term profits offered by purely speculative investment has turned the stock currency and real estate markets into crisis creation machines. As the Asian financial crisis, the Mexican peso crisis, and the dot-com collapse all demonstrate. And I would say it's just sickening. Like I've told you on voice messages, the house across the street, what year did it sell? 2019. It sold for $109,000. People that bought it probably sunk $50,000 of remodeling work into it. They turned around and sold it to someone, and those people sold it for $269,900. And now the guy that's living in it hasn't done shit to it, and he's expecting $350,000 from it on 5 acres.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's just crazy. So yeah, I mean, this easy short-term profits to just drive, and they don't realize they're helping create part of a bubble that's going to burst. It has to. Right. So the more panicked we become, the more biometric IDs and high-tech fences come along. If the dream of the open, borderless, small planet was a ticket to profits in the 90s, the nightmare of the menacing fortress Western continents under siege from jihadists or illegal immigrants plays the same role now. So the only prospect that threatens the booming disaster economy on which so much money depends, from weapons to oil to engineering to surveillance to patented drugs, is the possibility of achieving some measure of peace. So we threaten them, and that's good. In 1993, Shimon Peres, the Israeli foreign minister, said, "We are not seeking a piece of flag, we are seeking a piece of market." Or we're interested only in a piece of market. So a few months later, the Israeli prime minister and the Palestinian Liberation Organization chairman, the PLO chairman, shook hands on the White House lawn to mark the inauguration of the Oslo Accord, a plan created in Oslo, Norway, for Israel. The world cheered, and the two got a Nobel Peace Prize, and then it all went horribly wrong. Because the handshake was not the sealing of a deal, it was merely an agreement to start a process with all the most contentious questions left unresolved. Arafat, the PLO chairman, was in a terrible bargaining position, having to negotiate his own return to the occupied territories, and he secured no agreement on the fate of Jerusalem, on Palestinian refugees, on Jewish settlers, or even on the right to Palestinian self-determination. The Oslo strategy, the negotiators claimed, was to push ahead with the peace of markets based on the idea that the rest would fall into place. By flinging open borders and joining the globalization juggernaut, both Israelis and Palestinians were supposed to experience such concrete improvements in daily life that a more hospitable context could be created for a peace of flags in the negotiations to come. The breakdown came because the peace of markets was a neo-colonialist basis designed so that when there would be peace between the Israelis and Palestinians, there would be a situation of dependence, of a structured lack of equality between the two entities. So the two factors that contributed to this was the influx of Soviet Jews, which was a direct result of Russia's shock therapy experiment. The other was the flipping of Israel's export economy from one based on traditional goods and high technology to one disproportionately dependent on selling expertise and devices related to counterterrorism. This created a powerful appetite inside Israel's wealthy and most powerful sectors for abandoning peace in favor of fighting a continual and continuously expanding war on terror. The start of the Oslo period for the Israel and Palestine coincided precisely with the most painful phase of the Chicago School experiment in Russia. The handshake on the White House lawn was on September 13, 1993, and exactly 3 weeks later, Yeltsin sent tanks into the Russian parliament and set fire to it and killed a crap ton of people, paving the way for his most brutal dose of economic shock. Over the course of the next 7 years, roughly 1 million Jews left the former Soviet Union and moved to Israel. And it's really hard to overstate the impact of such a large and rapid population transfer to a country as small as Israel. Before the arrival of the Soviet refugees, Israel could not have severed itself for any length of time from the Palestinian populations in Gaza and the West Bank. Its economy could no more survive without Palestinian labor than California could run without Mexicans. That's kind of a sad statement. And Trump wants to deport them all. Roughly 150,000 Palestinians would leave their homes in Gaza and the West Bank every day to travel into Israel to clean streets and build roads, while Palestinian farmers and tradespeople filled trucks with goods and sold them in Israel and in other parts of the territory. Each side depended on each other economically, and Israel took aggressive measures to prevent the Palestinian territories from developing autonomous trade relationships with other Arab states. Then, as the Oslo Accords came into effect, that deeply interdependent relationship was abruptly severed. On March 30, 1993, Israel began its policy of closure, sealing off the border between Israel and the occupied territories, often for days or weeks at a time, preventing Palestinians from getting to their jobs and selling their goods. 1993 had been held up as the dawn of a new hopeful era, and that year, it was, because the occupied territories were transformed from rundown dormitories housing the underclass of the Israeli state into suffocating prisons. Yes, it was definitely the dawn of a new era. By 1996, 66% of the Palestinian labor force was either unemployed or severely Should I just repeat it? Or severely poor. With the most tech-dependent economy in the world, Israel was hit harder by the dot-com crash than anywhere else, and the country went into free fall. By June 2001, analysts were predicting that roughly 300 high-tech Israeli firms would go bankrupt with tens of thousands of layoffs. But the Israeli government quickly intervened with a powerful 10.7% increase in military spending, partially to finance through cutbacks in social services. The government also encouraged the tech industry to branch out from information and communication technologies into security and surveillance. In this period, the Israeli Defense Forces played a role as a business incubator because that's how you got money, was through joining the military and starting a company, right? So it was a radical embrace of Chicago School economics as embodied by Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel's central bank chief, who was the chief architect of the IMF shock therapy adventures in Russia and Asia. By 2003, Israel was making a stunning recovery, which was due to Israel's savvy positioning of itself as kind of a shopping mall for homeland security technologies. Overnight, Israel became, in the words of Forbes magazine, the go-to country for anti-terrorism technologies. So during the Oslo Accords, the people were looking for peace to provide growth. Now they're looking for security so violence doesn't curtail their growth. So here's how big Israel's reach is. A call made to the NYPD will be recorded and analyzed on technology created by NICE Systems, an Israeli firm. NICE also monitors communications for the LAPD and Time Warner and more. Images captured in the London Tube system are recorded on Israeli technology. It's also used at the DoD and Washington Dulles Airport. It also helps corporate giants like Home Depot and Target keep an eye on their workers. Employees of the cities of LA and Columbus, Ohio carry smart card IDs made by an Israeli company. The firewalls in the computer networks of some of the largest electric companies in the US were built by an Israeli tech giant, and so much more. The extraordinary performance of Israel's homeland security companies is rarely discussed as a factor in the politics of the region, but it should be. It's not a coincidence that the Israeli state's decision to put counterterrorism at the center of its export economy coincided precisely with its abandonment of peace negotiations, as well as a clear strategy to reframe its conflict with the Palestinians, not as a battle against a nationalist movement with a specific goal for land and rights, but rather as a part of the global war on terror, one against illogical, fanatical forces bent only on destruction. Like all other Chicago School frontiers, Israel's post-9/11 growth has been marked by the rapid stratification of society between the rich and the poor inside the state. It created an epidemic of inequality, the likes of which Israelis have never known. Israel's corporations didn't just support the war, they sponsored it. An entire country has turned itself into a fortified, gated community surrounded by locked out people living in permanently excluded red zones. The disaster capitalism complex thrives in conditions of low-intensity grinding conflict. In April 2007, U.S. soldiers began implementing a plan to turn several volatile Baghdad neighborhoods into gated communities, surrounded by checkpoints and concrete walls where residents would be tracked inside using biometric technology. The plan is to settle into Colombia or Nigeria, a never-ending war fought in a large measure by private soldiers and paramilitaries, damped down just enough to get the national resources out of the ground, helped along by mercenaries guarding the pipelines, platforms, and water reserves. Israel constructed a system designed to keep workers from working. So in a network, and they hold them in a network of open holding pens for millions of people who have been categorized as surplus humanity. Palestinians are not the only people who have been so categorized. Millions of Russians also became surplus in their own country. This discarding of 25 to 60% of the population has been the hallmark of the Chicago School Crusade since the misery villages began mushrooming throughout the Southern Cone in the 70s. In South Africa, Russia, and New Orleans, the rich build walls around themselves, but Israel has taken this disposal process a step further. It built walls around the dangerous poor, and now Trump intends to evacuate them all so he can make a Singapore on the Gaza Strip.
Boy, it's all connected, huh?
Oh, it's all.
And it's not over.
Oh,
Oh man.
I don't know how, honestly, how we're going to, how this 47 days into his presidency, and wow.
Yeah, it's really, really crazy. Wow. So with that, we have heard how all that's connected to what's happening right now, and I really hope this can help folks realize where we're at, what's happening. And it's been a long story. And what do you think we will continue with this story? What will be the next session? We can take a break, of course.
Yeah, are we taking a break next week because of your?
Yeah, I really would like that. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So when we come back, we're going to go into the medical lies, because
Okay.
we're going to talk about the cancer industry and other things.
And do you think about a title for that, or you want to think about it later?
Yeah,
we got time.
About it later.
It's okay. So it's going to be that's always an interesting subject to look at, all the different. I mean, just looking at the medical industry in general, it's so useless. It's so, and you've pointed out the things that are good, like the trauma part of it, the traumatism, the fact that you break a bone, you can run out and get saved. That's a good thing. But then there's so many other parts of the medical industry that is just, and that's with what's happening today. It's going to connect a lot of dots too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So there you go. We'll let you know what time this is going to be, what day especially, and
well, it'll be a week, not a week from tomorrow, 2 weeks from tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll think of a title. But yeah, we'll talk about, because now we address the economy. Now we have to address the disease machine, and we have to understand that doctors are on a mission to kill disease, which means everything they give you is going to kill you.
Yeah.
Every prescription they write you is going to kill you, because it's a killing profession. It's the simple fact of life.
Yeah. Okay. Well, with that, we're going to leave you folks, and hope you can let us know that you've been here by liking, subscribing, or whatever form you wish to support us. It's always very appreciated. And visit AlohaNidauLiving.com if you wish to go deeper into actually doing something about this, because that's what this is all about.
Let's take a brief, I don't know if you listened to the video I sent you today. Let's make a brief statement to prepare for 2 weeks from now.
Okay.
So beer makers used to brew beer without hops. And then in 1512, I think it was, Germany decreed that from henceforward, so for over 500 years, 200, what? 15 try 1,000 years.
Yeah, I don't know.
I can't do that. Yeah, it's 1,000 years. So in 1512, Germany declared from that point forward, hops had to be included with every beer making.
Yeah, a friend actually told me that story a long time ago. It's like, beer, they've officialized what a beer should be. It's kind of dumb.
Well, what's the problem with that? Hops is one of the most estrogenic plants on this planet. They knew this because the women, the young girls, were the ones picking the hops, and they were having they started having menstrual irregularities.
Oh, really? Cool.
From the phytoestrogens. This is the potency of hops. It has so much estrogen in it that if you just handle the flowers, you get a dose of estrogen. What does this do for men? It drives down your IQ. It makes you sexually impotent. It gives you a beer belly. It gives you man boobs, and you don't give a shit. You just follow along with the herd. So for 1,000 years or however long, I cannot do that math for some reason, we have allowed this. We have just gone along with it as hops is a natural part of beer. But no, the way they brewed it without hops before, it was actually sexually stimulating. They didn't need Viagra. It decreases the estrogen of the hops, decreases testosterone in men. And women, because women have testosterone also, and it's cancer causing. And I can speak to that, as I told you on voice message today. A year ago, a little bit over a year ago, for my age, I fell into, I saw this beautiful ad for an estrogen replacement cream on Facebook that said it was all natural. And I did 3 months of it, and I have had cancer from that.
Wow. Okay, so a lot of things to learn about then.
Yeah. So that's part of our Aloha Aini-Dao living. We want beer brewers that will be willing to start brewing beer without. It's one of the old-fashioned types of beers called Gruit. So that our beer is healthy, so that our men are sexually potent.
That would be amazing to try all those different beers.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's there's a few brewers making them. They're more profound in Europe than they are in America, of course. And of course their beer is incredibly expensive. So that's part of Aloha, our ranching enterprises. Is we want interns who are able and ready to try brewing beer without hops.
So a little advance for what's coming in the next sessions and what's happening in the discoveries of the owl. Well, it's not the Owl Council House now. Owl Council House.
Owl Council House training program. And the cancer, the truths of the cancer industry. That's what it will do. Okay.
Cancer industry, that's a good one.
It's important, absolutely important for people to understand, because with all the COVID shots causing turbo cancers, people need to know this, so that the truth of it, what the cancer industry is really up to.
Man, okay. So there we go. And so we will wait for the next session, and stay healthy, folks, and listen to this kind of information, please. So see you next time. Bye-bye.